do everything over here. All right, so starting here in 1 minute, I'll have everything set up. Again, this is going to be a really, really cool shiur. I've been working on this for quite some time and developing this whole concept of the question of how do we know that this whole corona thing and everything that's going on, please share, that this whole corona situation and everything that's happening, everything that's going on is all tied in, and how it was all predicted, or it's happening exactly at a time that makes sense, exactly at a point in time that would make sense for this all to take place, to happen at, and not any earlier or necessarily later. Again, I'm neither a prophet or anything of that nature, but I'm using sources from Torah to be able to make this this calculation and come up with these ideas and come up with this. Again, if you want to follow us, I'm putting on Facebook the Zoom link as well. If you want to follow in on Zoom, which I'd recommend because I have a little bit of a slideshow to go along with this, which I can't share on Facebook. So I'm going to attach the Zoom link. If you want to follow over here on Zoom, I'm going to try and use this. So I just put that in the comments over here. If you want to follow that, you can log in that way and follow along with me on the Zoom link. All right, so I'm going to open up the slideshow over here and let's get going right into this whole situation. So here's how we are going to start addressing this. The question is that I think a lot of people are asking. I think a lot of people are trying to come to terms with is this whole corona situation that we are facing right now, is this the end of days? And if it is, like, you know, why now? How did this all play out? Every day we're watching the news and it's getting crazier and crazier. And is there a source to cite that this is where it ends? So I want to take you through a lesson in history to be able to, oh, hello, Gabe. We've got somebody here in our household, Gabe, watching in. So I'm going to be taking you through a lesson in history to be walking through this whole class on talking and going over how we know where we are and where we play out with history. So starting first thing is, the question is, when did the Golus that we are in, the present exile, when did that start? So if we take a look time-wise, where we are and where things played out and where the Golus started. So it officially started in the year 70. Hello, hi.
What?
Hi. All right.
Did you make a PowerPoint?
Yeah, we have a PowerPoint going on. You want to join us?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Did you make a PowerPoint for this?
All right. So,
Oh my God.
all right. If you're following on with us, all right. So the present Golus that we are in, Andy Blyer says hi, Gabe. All right. So the present the PowerPoint starts out. When did the Golus that we have start? And the answer is that it started in the year 70 CE, which is just under 2,000 years ago. Just under 2,000 years ago is when the present situation that we are in started. So, hello, Reb Dov joining in. I think we already have 5 viewers. I don't know who we have on the Zoom, but I know we have 5 or 6 viewers over here on the Facebook. 70 CE, which is just under, it's about 1,950 years ago is when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So officially, we have been in Golus for 1,950 years. That's how long we have been in this Golus. So the big question is how long were we supposed to be in Golus for? So if you go through a number of sources and a number of different Svarim, it's hello, Menachem Shon's joining us over here on the Zoom. Welcome in. How long is this Golus supposed to be? So there's a lot of different sources and a lot of different starim that will tackle this idea, how long this fourth exile of the Jewish nation is officially supposed to last. We know one of the famous midrashim happens in Bereshis that Yaakov is about to pass away, and he's about to reveal to the Shvatim before his passing. He's about to tell them when Mashiach is going to come, and he knows the date. He knows exactly when it's going to happen. He knows exactly how things are going to pan out, and he is about to tell them exactly the situation, and Hashem causes him to forget. One of the reasons it says Hashem causes him to forget is because it's so far off into the future that if people would, know that it's that far out, that they're going to become, people are just going to despair and say that's way too far down the road, and that's a long time, and we're going to get unexcited about the current situation. So he wasn't able to tell them, but it's clear that it was supposed to be a long period of time. Bilam had it, and it's mentioned further into the Zohar. He says, I see it, but it's not now. It's far off into the distance. And also, even in the Gemara's times, the Gemara mentions Kol Kitzim, that all the official end times have passed, but yet it's still off into the future. So there's a whole question about when does this Golus end? How long are we supposed to be in this exile for? So for the past 2 days, I gave a shir that's on this week's Parsha, and it's based on an Ohr Hachaim. It's an Ohr Hachaim on this week's Parsha. It's a very fascinating Ohr Hachaim that has to do with this week, Parsha Tzav, second verse in this week's Parsha. And over there, the Ohr Hachaim addresses this question clearly. He says, how long? Again, it's absolutely fascinating that it's this week's Parsha that tackles this issue. The Ohr Hachaim asks the question, how long are we supposed to be in Golus for? So in his answer, he basically says that originally this fourth exile was supposed to be 1,000 years. Originally, he says, if you look at historically, Jews were in Mitzrayim officially 400 years, and they weren't even there for the full 400 years. Officially, we were in Babel for 70 years. That was the first official exile post Mitzrayim. Then you have Persia. Persia wasn't even the whole official time period. The same thing was with the Hanukkah story, which was the Greek exile. We weren't there for a whole official time period. Then you have the fourth exile, which is the Gedolim of Edom. So how long are we supposed to be there for? So Ohr Hachaim brings down a source that originally we're supposed to be here for 1,000 years. It's supposed to be 1,000-year exile, and by the end of 1,000 years, things are supposed to pan out, and Mashiach's supposed to come, and everything's supposed to come to an end. However, because of how things played out with time, with our actions, we didn't get full credit. And he says by the end of 2,000 years that Mashiach is going to come. It wasn't 1,000 years; it's 2,000 years, which is very interesting, by the way, because a lot of people want to say that Mashiach has to come by the year 6,000. And if Mashiach's coming by the year 6,000, that still puts things off about 250 years into the future, meaning a Messianic era wouldn't happen for another 250 some odd years into the future. So the Ohr Hachaim actually shortens that, and he says this Golus is only going to be a 2,000-year Golus. And basically that pins it that there would officially be from this year and standing another 50 years and counting. All right? Now I'm going to address a lot of other sources as we're going to go further and show how perhaps those 50 years are not relevant or maybe not even so particular that we need to be looking at. But step by step, I'm going to build over there. But the point is, the Ohr Hachaim said that, just looking at this week's Parsha, if you open an Ohr Hachaim, second verse, he tackles it. The Ohr Hachaim says that Mashiach was supposed to come after 1,000 years in this Golus of Edom, and didn't happen because of how things played out. So we were destined for another 1,000 years, which leads us to the year 2070. That playing out. And that being said, so how does he come to this conclusion? He bases it on the second verse in this week's Parsha, which is that the Oila offering has to be put onto the Mizbeach, and with that situation that it stays there overnight, and on the flame on the Mizbeach overnight, and the night at the end of the night in the morning, that's when we can take it, and even or whatever is going on with the Oila over there. So he says Kabbalistically, spiritually, this is all a reference if you take the inner meaning of what's going on over here in this week's parsha, the oila being on the mizbeach all night really refers to that night refers to Golus, and he brings down a whole source how time by God is divided into a 1,000-year period. 1 day for God is 1,000 years. I told the famous joke yesterday that I'll say it again for those who missed out. That the kid comes to God and he says, God, what is 1,000 years to you? And God says it's but a day. The kid says to God, and what's $1 million to you? God says it's but it's but a penny. So the kid says to God, can I have a penny? God says, sure, you can have it in a day. Anyhow, point is, in God's time frame, 1,000 years is 1 day. So if we break down, the world is supposed to exist until officially year 6,000 or till whatever. Officially, what we know is that we are 250 years away from the official end of time frame, and that's what Moshiach we know has to come. But he said that if we look in perspective of how long this Golus is supposed to last, meaning how long the Jews were supposed to be in exile for, so he says it's supposed to be 1,000 days. And if you take 1,000 days and you break it in two, he says half of that is supposed to be the evening, and half of that is supposed to be the morning, which means, as we know in Torah, Vayher, Vayboker, there's evening and there's morning. So that being the situation, if you have 1,000 years, you break it into half. So the first 500 years are the night. Second 500 years are when time starts to break, and that's when things start being, and that's when the morning starts to pan out, and that's when things start to lighten up, and that's when light starts to enter into things. So we're going to take a look through history over here. Very, very fascinating. If you take this Ohr Hachaim and you open up a book chronologically of history of the world and how things played out for the past 2,000 years. Basically, again, I want to summarize again what the Ohr Hachaim is saying. He's saying that 500 years post Beis Hamikdash is considered the nighttime. It is absolute darkness in the world. It's darkness, and post that point in time is going to be the period of light, period of Mashiach, and not necessarily Mashiach, but he says it should start being Mashiach. Officially, Mashiach was supposed to come after 500 years, or we were supposed to start heading towards the light, and by the 1,000th year, Mashiach was supposed to come. So let's take a look how history panned out from the time of the Beis Hamikdash. So the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed in the year 70. And the Jews were basically all exiled out of Israel. Things were kind of crazy. If you go 500 years post the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, you get to a point on the calendar which is 570 CE, or on the Hebrew calendar, it's 4,330 on the Jewish calendar. So hold on 1 second. I'm trying to mute. Got sound coming from the background. I'm going to mute that out. Hang on 1 second. All right. So I'm just back with you all. All right. So basically how things pan out is, you know that 5,700 year 570 CE, which is 500 years after the Beis Hamikdash, was when the Ohr Hachaim would say that you would start seeing some light start to break in the world. Interestingly enough, according to this Ohr Hachaim, you look what's going on in the history of the world in and around the year 570 CE. Jews have been in exile for 500 years already. Fast forward from 570 about an extra about 45 years in that time frame. Within 45 years of the 500 years is when the Persians, at that point in time, conquer Yerushalayim. And for the first time, interestingly enough, in 500 years, the Jews are allowed to return to Yerushalayim. And there starts being a Jewish presence again in Eretz Israel. Again, Ohr Hachaim's words, that exactly when the dawn is supposed to break, 500 years into the day, into the Golus, that's when you're going to start seeing some light. So there starts to be there was a lot of darkness after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Jews were exiled and Babel. Also, we had, we started having around this point in time is when around 570 actually is when the Gemara started to be written and started adding a little bit more light, and things started to change around in the situation over there. So fast forwarding onto the calendar over here, again, the Ohr Hachaim says that Mashiach wasn't going to come in the first 1,000 years. We weren't going to be worthy, and we would be stuck, and we'd be stranded for another 1,000 years into Galus. So when did the second 1,000 years start? So if you take the Ohr Hachaim's calculation, when the second 1,000 years started, it would have started in the year 1070 CE or 4,830 on the Hebrew in the Hebrew calendar. Why is that interesting? Because within about 10 to 15 years of that time frame, this is again going into the second 1,000 years and the first 500 years of darkness. So right in this period of time, if you open up the annals of Jewish history, you will find what happened at this point in time, what's taking place in history. Exactly at this point in time is when the Crusaders start. The Crusaders is the entire whole portion of history dealing with persecuting the Jews and, bringing Jews to whatever all based on the church, and a huge chunk of the torture that the Jews would experience during the next 500 years and even 1,000 years is due to the Crusaders and the church and everything that came from that. It all started right around this time, because remember, Christianity didn't exactly take off right away. Around year zero, it took time to build up as an official religion and the church and how it actually turned over. But until Jews started getting prosecuted on a level from the church, it wasn't until about 1070 CE. About 1,000 years, again, it's now 1,000 years post the Beis Hamikdash. And again, if you use the Ohr Hachaim's timeline, it's exactly 1,000 years into it, and that's when the Ohr Hachaim calculates the second night will be starting, and the second darkness is going to start to fall into play over here. All right. So again, the Ohr Hachaim says that fast forward another 500 years, that is when the dawn is going to start breaking dawn. So based on this calendar and based on this calculation, if we follow this whole cycle, that by the 500th year of the second 1,000 years of running Golas, which comes out to when? 1,570, or 4,830 on the Hebrew calendar. So that's when dawn should start breaking. That's when we're going to really, he says, if Mashiach is going to come by the end of 2,000 years, so by 500th year, that's when the dawn's going to start breaking, according to the Ohr Hachaim. In this week's Parsha, he says the dawn's going to start breaking, and we're going to start entering into the beginning of light and the beginning of the Messianic era, and it has to come to play, Mashiach has to come to play by the end of these 500 years. Well, very, very, very interesting. What happens in the 500th year? Well, who's alive? Who's making headlines at the 1570 mark? As in, right when light is supposed to start taking place in the world. What is happening at that point in time in Jewish history? Very interesting. Who's alive? The Arizal. Who's alive? Yitzhak Cairo. Who's alive? The Ramah. The Ramak. Kabbalah is breaking forth by the seams, and it's happening right at this point in the 500 years. That's when light is supposed to start leaking into the world, and that is when Mashiach times is supposed to start coming to fruition. So it's very interesting. The Ohr Hachaim has this played out, that we have this process: 500 years of darkness, 500 years of light, 500 years of darkness, 500 years of light. So right at the beginning of the second 500 years of light that the Ohr Hachaim talks about in this week's Parsha starts breaking forth. The Arizal's alive, Rabbi Yitzhak Cairo's alive, the Ramah's alive, the Ramak's alive. That's how this 500 years starts off. So it's great breakthroughs in Torah, all starting at the second break of dawn, as the Ohr Hachaim discusses in this week's Parsha. All right, going forward over here. So as we are continuing forward over here, 100 years later, dawn is breaking. As again, the Ohr Hachaim says, the more you head into the light of these 500 years, the more light's coming into the world, the closer we're getting to Mashiach. not my words, Ohr Hachaim. This week's Parsha Tzav. Second explanation. These 500 years that started in the past 500 years ago, everything's moving us closer towards Moshiach. It's closer and closer and closer towards the end of the exile. So, 100 years post the Arizal, you're entering into a whole different time frame. You're entering into the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh. This is his lifetime. And the Ohr Hachaim is in Eretz Yisrael. The Ohr Hachaim is Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh is the author and whose parish I'm basing this whole idea and this whole concept off of. So his whole parish, this is 100 years post the beginning of these 500 years of light. Who's also alive in the world at this point in time? Who parallels, and also a very, very interesting parallel to the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh is the Bal Shem Tov. Bal Shem Tov, this is exactly the Bal Shem Tov's time. And this is exactly when the Bal Shem Tov starts teaching Hasidus into the world. Hasidus is allowed to be revealed. He gets a message, if you know the whole story of the Bal Shem Tov, that the Bal Shem Tov gets a message from the prophet from biblical times, Achia Shiloni, that he's allowed and he's supposed to start revealing Hasidus into the world. Interestingly enough, again, it's in these last 500 years, exactly what the Ohr Hachaim spoke about, that this is the last 500 years of the second 1,000 years of Golus, and this is going to start gearing us closer and closer and closer towards Mashiach. So how does that play out? So interestingly enough, a big spoken about piece and a big idea that happened in the life of the Bal Shem Tov happens in the year 1746, Hebrew year 5570. Famous story that the Bal Shem Tov on Rosh Hashanah elevated himself Lamaila. He went up to Shemayim, and he basically started exploring around what goes on up over there, and he saw all the great tzaddikim and where they were, and he entered into the chambers of Mashiach. And he says to Mashiach, he says, when are you coming? When is Mashiach coming to the world? So Mashiach answers the Bal Shem Tov. Essentially, it's a long, drawn-out answer. It's a number of things that he answers him. And if you're following on the Zoom, I have the exact link over here. But it's a very fascinating answer that the Bal Shem Tov gives over here. And he says that when your teachings are spread out to the entire world, that's when I'm going to come. There's much more to the story, and he has more that he says to him over there. And if you look at the official letter that the Bal Shem Tov wrote about the situation, it carries over a lot more detailed. But basically, the Bal Shem Tov, he told the Bal Shem Tov, you're going to be the start of all this. It's all going to flow from you. You are breaking through a barrier that didn't happen in the world before. Your teachings are going to flow and bring about great revelations into the world, and it's all going to flow through you. So going forward from the Bal Shem Tov, again, Bal Shem Tov is 1740s into late 1760s, 1770s. Based, again, if those who are just tuning in, this whole shiur is based on the Ohr Hachaim. The Ohr Hachaim has, on this week's Parsha, has a whole explanation how Mashiach has to come by the end of 2,000 years of Golus. And he says that if you make that calculation, starting with Beis Mikdash being destroyed and us going into Golus in the year 70 CE, which, by the way, you may be able to calculate it from earlier because really a lot of things were happening earlier than that, and it was just a matter of time. But if you go by the official calculation that Mashiach, that the Beis Mikdash was destroyed in 70 CE, it would bring us to the year on the English calendar 2070. But we don't even have to go that far, as you're going to see how interesting things have played out. Excuse me for 1 second. I'm going to be right back. I'm going to grab myself a tissue. Alrighty. So history starts changing. History starts changing in a major way for the world at large post the Bal Shem Tov times. Post Hasidus being revealed into the world has a major eclipse, and things start changing in a major way. what happens, what's starting to happen in the world. Just on a practical level, you have in 1770s, you have the founding of the United States of America. You have Napoleon with his whole march across Europe, and he's, his whole push towards the French Revolution. You have Russia's empire is growing majorly. The whole Western world is starting to be developed in this late 1700 time frame, right around the Bal Shem Tov's time, right around when Hasidus is coming to play into the world. All this is happening, and all this is bringing about a very interesting revelation into the world. So the Bal Shem Tov knew from Moshiach. He literally got word from Moshiach that things are going to happen and things are going to develop into the world based on his teachings. So we would make sense logically if you want to follow the annals of history. If the Bal Shem Tov was told that by Moshiach, then let's follow the pattern of the Bal Shem Tov, because that has to lead us to where Moshiach is coming. And I think that's going to lead us to what you're going to see today from the coronavirus and how things play out through history. So watch the play out from the Bal Shem Tov, how things play down. Again, we're basing this whole shir, if you're just tuning in, based on the Ohr Hachaim on this week's Parsha. There's an amazing Ohr Hachaim in this week's Parsha where he talks about how long the exile of the Jewish people is going to be. And he says it's going to end after 2,000 years, which started in 2070. And from the year 1570 would have been the point when light starts entering into the world, and everything is going to start changing from that point in time. So there's a famous idea that has been brought down in a number of places that it's actually an incredible Zohar. The Zohar talks about it, that in the 600th year of which this is based on Genesis 7:11. If you're wanting to get a survey, you can go to 7:11 also. Anyhow, Genesis 7:11, Bereshit 7:11, the 600th year of the life of Noach, all the well springs of the deep burst open. And the Zohar comments on this, and it says on this pasuk that in the future, the Zohar is writing this. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is letting the world know that in the future, in the 6th millennium, which is in the 5,000 years that we're in right now, in the 600th year of that millennium, that the well springs of the world are going to break forth. When is that time frame? What does that equal out to? That equals out to 1740, 1840s time frame. That is exactly when the Industrial Revolution begins. And what happens again during this period of time? This is when the Bal Shem Tov comes to play. This is when Ohr Hachaim comes to play, who's teaching. We're basing this whole shir on and time frame and following his chronologically, spacing the word chronologically. Someone is watching over here. I got the word better. I'm crashing on the word over here. Anyhow, bottom line is that
chronologically.
Thank you. So chronologically, based on the system over here, that by the 1740s, 1840s, this is when wisdom is going to start bouncing forth into the world. All right. So again, we go back to the Bal Shem Tov. He's told by Mashiach, follow your train of thought, trickle down, and you're going to get to where Mashiach is supposed to end up. So again, 2070 is the year, according to Ohr Hachaim, that the 2,000 years of Golus that he claims in this week's Parsha Tzav, that the 2,000 years of Golus would be up. And according to him, that if you do the math, just interesting, I was playing around with this with a calculator over here. Again, I'm not a Navi, and I'm taking a leap of faith by doing it, but just playing around over here with numbers, that if you take his calculation, the 500 years is the 12 hours a day, divide officially 12 hours a day by if you divide 500 by 12, you get 41 years, backtrack 2070. Officially, it's the last hour of the day. Would start by like 2030, and we know the last hour of the day already starts getting dark, and it starts heading to a period of darkness. So the last bit of light, the breaking of light, which is when we should start seeing, what's it called, should be the last part of the, around now, exactly now. And that's how things start to play out. So let's see how that translates forward into another source. Let's go back to the Bal Shem Tov. if you look at the Bal Shem Tov and how things play out, who are the Bal Shem Tov's Talmidim? Who are the Bal Shem Tov's number one disciples over here? So I took a list. I used Wikipedia, but Wikipedia has it pretty correct on who are the main Talmidim of the Bal Shem Tov. You have the Talmud Yaakov Yosef. You have Reb Zevel of Kitzis. You have Yichud Michal of Zlotchev. You have the Magid, Reb Pinchas of Karetz, Nachum of Chernobyl, the Shpol Zayda, Gershon Kitov, Moshe Chaim Ephraim, his grandson, and Baruch HaMeshbu is another grandson, and Nachum Adenka, and Meir Hagadol of Parmishlan. So these were like all the Talmidim of the Bal Shem Tov. All of them had their own disciples, and some of them had Chassidus branch off from them. Who is the Bal Shem Tov's number one primary disciple, though? Who does he transfer official reign over to? Officially, after the Bal Shem Tov passes away, he gives it to his son for a year. After the first year of his passing, on Shavuos, he hands off the reins to none other than the Magid of Mizrich, Dov Ber Mizrich. So we move on to the Magid. Who are the Magid's numbered Talmidim? So the Magid had a lot of Talmidim. There's a huge branch breaking off from the Magid. And based on that, that's where the biggest chunk of modern day Chassidus breaks off from the Magid's teachings. But let's follow the ideal of the word chronologically, how things play out. So you have from the Magid's Talmidim Avram HaMalach, who was his son, Nachman of Chernobyl, Eli Melch of Lezhinsk, Zlush of Anapol, Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. You have someone's making a comment over here. Swirly says he'd love to hear audio. I don't know why you can't hear audio. Shimi, I know you're here. Can you hear? Is anyone else who can't hear?
I hear you fine on Zoom.
Yes, but he won't hear you, so you have to type it in.
I don't know why someone can't hear me. Otherwise, you can go on Facebook. We have the feed going on Facebook over here.
Yeah.
So anyhow, so the Talmidim of the Magid. Again, looking at this list over here, you have the whole list. If you're following the whole list of primary Talmidim of the Magid, there is a nice long list of them. After the Magid's passing, it's known that the official leadership was given over to Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk. And we know that he moved to Eretz Yisrael. He left behind all the Chassidim in Ukraine, and he left off to Eretz Yisrael. He's buried today in Eretz Yisrael in Tveria. There's a whole cemetery over there of Talmidim of Bal Shem Tov that took over. The Alter Rebbe was one of arguably one of the most prized students of the Magid, if not the prized student. And it's for that reason that the Alter Rebbe was positioned and told by the Magid to help to write a updated version based on Chassidus and Torah of Bal Shem Tov, updated Shulchan Aruch, which is today used by the entire Hasidic world, to update Exile, which interestingly enough is not used by the entire Hasidic world, but it was based on the Magid's idea that he really trusted Shner Zalman, the Baal Tanya, to become his primary disciple. And I think that it's arguable in many steps and many elements that the Alter Rebbe would become their primary disciple. Even after the Alter Rebbe called Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk his Rebbe, it's arguable that basically he became the official takeover of the Magid. And the reason I say that is if you want to follow the generations, in Magids, they have a very interesting chart. It's literally the size of the whole room, and it branches out every possible Chassidus and every tree, how they come down. But very, very few Chassidim today claim remotely to be a descendant or claim to be a branch or still have teachings of the Bal Shem Tov. In fact, I've carried this conversation with a number of different groups of Chassidus, and they openly say, Satmar, I think, openly says that we have lost the Masorah of the Bal Shem Tov. Satmar, which has been one of the largest Chassidic groups today, say, we have no clue what the Bal Shem Tov stood about. We enjoy being Chassidish, but we have no clue one of the few people that I think the two, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone else over here want to chime in, but from what I know, I think today that there are only two Hasidic groups that claim to have some sort of Masorah from the Bal Shem Tov, and those are Lubavitch and Breslov. Breslov based on Nachman's teachings, and Lubavitch based on 7 Doros of Lubavitch. So if you want to follow down, say again?
Out of the main ones, yeah, but there are a couple of the smaller ones that my understanding is still do, such as Trapkov, which came originally through Tzanz, but officially the Trapkov time is that he still is connected with the Messiah of the Bal Shem Tov.
All right, well, I think as far as...
But I'm saying the main ones, yeah.
From today, the two main ones that will claim a real Masorah back to the Bal Shem Tov, you're gonna have a hard time finding any Hasidic Rebbe who still claims that he has a direct Masorah back to the Bal Shem Tov. It comes from this Rebbe, from that Rebbe, up this way, cousin, left, right, whatever. To claim a direct Masorah all the way to the Bal Shem Tov and a clean derech, I think and again, Breslov doesn't officially have a Seder Doros. It's Nachman and Kudim Moran, versus Lubavitch has a straight. I think Lubavitch arguably is the only one that can claim a straight generational path straight down from the Bal Shem Tov. And the reason I say this, it's relevant because again, if you go back to the Bal Shem Tov's promise, which is that his encounter with Moshiach is that when your wellsprings are spread out the entire world.
Hey, Shirley, welcome.
What?
I welcome Rebbe Stroll.
Okay.
Park.
All right. So when your wellsprings are spread out to the entire world, so arguably that is going to be when we're going to see Mashiach in the world. All right. So continuing forward over here, I'm just showing over here the path straight down from Chabad. You have the Alter Rebbe, the Mitzvah Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, all the way down to the 7th generation of Nachman L'Shneerson, the Rebbe of our time over here. So why do I bring this? Besides for the fact that I'm a Lubavitcher and I want to follow this path, but it's more than that because I think there's something really, really incredible to follow over here and something that's going to lead us to my point from today. If you progress further, all right, the very first step, the very first page of when the Lubavitcher Rebbe accepted Nesias is Basel Agani. Basel Agani is the Rebbe's first day in office and his first moment in so to speak, in his Nesias. So the Rebbe starts out Lubavitch of the 7th generation saying exactly that we are the 7th generation. And what does that mean? He starts out very interesting. He says history lesson. The Lubavitcher Rebbe starts out Basel Agani by giving a history lesson that from the beginning of time, from Adam and Eve, there are 7 generations, and progressively they succeed in angering God progressively more and more and more. That God basically starts removing himself from the world a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, all the way until he's completely removed from the world. Someone else is making a comment over here. Hey, Yosef, hello. All right, so just going back over here. How do I back? Let me say back. Okay, anyhow, the point is that the Rebbe's point is that we are from that point in time, God had removed himself 7 generations. Now God has this whole interesting thing that goes on from starting with Abraham, starting with Avram Avinu. That Avram Avinu comes along and God likes what he's doing in the world. He brings godliness back into the world. His son Yitzchak, Yaakov has a son Levi has a son Kahas has a son Amram has a son Moshe Rabbeinu. 7 generations, and progressively all of these generations do their thing in bringing God down closer and closer and closer, more and more and more into the world. That being the case, he says, God entered the world. And I guess at some point following, God's presence more or less stayed into the world through the generations. And at some point in time, it progressively left the world more and more and more and more and more until God's presence was removed from the world. And Lubavitcher Rebbe says something, it's powerful. He basically says that God's back in the world. God's followed the seven generations, and basically it was a pattern, it was a progression, but through 7 generations of Chabad, we brought God's dwelling back into the world. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who again, if you want to follow why I'm bringing Lubavitch, not just because I am a Lubavitcher, but I'm bringing Lubavitch because you have to follow the pattern straight down from the Bal Shem Tov. What is the Bal Shem Tov's promise? The Bal Shem Tov's promise is when your wellsprings, when your teachings are going to be spread out into the world, that's when you're going to see things start changing in the world. That's when Moshiach is going to come. And again, going back, this whole interesting thing is based on, this whole shir is based on a timeline set out by the Ohr Hachaim in this week's Parsha. And hold on one second. All right. So based on this timeline on, someone's chatting again. All right, very nice. Okay, so based on this timeline that we're following by, that the Lubavitcher Rebbe tells us, starting in the very first time that he takes office, that he takes lead, that he enters into this whole pattern, that this is the 7th generation. Why is that relevant? Why does that matter? Why does this play out into the whole picture of all of creation and all of timeline? Because he's basically saying that there's going to be 7 generations from the Bal Shem Tov, of Chabad, and there's nothing after me. There will be no following this. This is the end of the road. All right? And people who are watching the Rebbe's leadership for 70 years, and the years that the Rebbe's physically alive and speaking, so we know that during this period of time, the Rebbe's, I'm getting a lot of chats over here. All right. Okay, yes, I'm very open to discussion later on. I'm very interested to what everyone has to say and thoughts and whatever. So after 70 years of time, through 7 years of time, we know that the Rebbe spoke a lot about how the world is changing in an incredible way, and it's leading us more and more and more to the era of the final redemption. So the Rebbe spoke a lot about things that were happening in the world, particularly if you go to the wars that were taking place in Israel, if you go to the first Gulf War, the Rebbe gave a lot of talks about how the world is progressing more and more and more into the ultimate geula, into the ultimate redemption. Again, if you're just joining now, I am basing this whole shir based off of an Ohr Hachaim, how the Ohr Hachaim really predicts, Ohr Hachaim in this week's Parsha really predicts where things are holding, and the Ohr Hachaim is basically predicting that we are at the end of times. If you follow his pattern and then you follow the Rebbe's pattern and they merge, it really is fascinating where things are holding. So
if I may add something, Joseph.
Go for it. Shimmy over here. He's not on Facebook.
Not on Facebook. I'm doing it on Zoom.
Go for it. I'm going to turn you up so people can hear you.
In Kabbalah, we know also in Kabbalah it talks about the spheres, the 7 spheres, the 10 spheres, like spheres Haimer. And the last sphere of all the spheres is Malchus, is the sphere of Malchus. Malchus translates as communication, or where the message goes out to the public. For example, when you have a marketing system, there's the thoughts behind it, there's the strategy, there's the emotions you're trying to activate, but all that sum total, what does it get down to? The message you're putting in the ad or in the video or whatever, what you're communicating. That's the final stage. But that's only the final stage of the communicator, of the person giving the message. The real final stage is how the message is accepted. Meaning, do people actually accept this message? Does it resonate with them? And why am I saying this? Because first of all, you have to understand each one of the Chabad Rebbes, there's 7 Rebbes, represents one of the 7 spheres. The Rebbe himself spoke about this. And obviously the Rebbe actually said that our generation, the Nasi and every single person in this generation, is the sphere of Malchus, meaning at that level, like you're saying, how the whole thing is unfolding, we're at the last stage of Malchus. Now, what's interesting is Malchus is, 1 second, it's telling me there's a meeting that has a time limit. Do you hear me?
It's fine. It says that we're not running out of time. Okay, go for
Yeah,
it.
okay. So it's an interesting point. First of all, the first point is it all adds up as well when you understand from Kabbalah and Chassidus how the spheres work, and that the final stage is Malchus. That's the touchdown. That's where you give over, and the message goes out to the ground, to the public, in this case. So that's one thing, there's Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. The Friedricher Rebbe's name was Yosef Yitzchak, and in Kabbalah and Chassidus, maybe even in the Ohr Hachaim, I'm not familiar,
I want to when we get
the name Yosef is very much associated with Tiferes HaYesod.
All right, so let me, before we delve like side topic, I just want to follow a pattern of thought right now, which is basically basing.
Yeah, we'll continue this later afterwards. We could talk about this. I just wanted to bring it up that it's from all angles. It's not just
absolutely. But the point I'm making is that there is a direct pattern. If you follow the chronology, this word keeps spacing me. The chronicle timeline that the Ohr Hachaim lays out in this week's Parsha. You open up the Ohr Hachaim and you go to Parsha Tzav and his parish on the second verse about the Carbon Ola, that the Golus is going to be 2,000 years, and from the last 500 years is when the dawn starts breaking, and you're going to start to see this progression more and more and more, and that starts with the Ohr Hachaim and the Bal Shem Tov. Actually, those 500 years started with the Arizal, and it progresses to the Bal Shem Tov and the Ohr Hachaim, and all this whole Seder of Chassidus. And if you follow the Bal Shem Tov's line straight down, you get to the Rebbe. The Rebbe starts the Lubavitcher Rebbe because if you're going to take that approach, that the Lubavitcher Rebbe is the most direct connection, arguably. Again, I'm sure I will have people who will argue with me, but I think that most people will agree that Lubavitch is perhaps the most direct connection you will have going straight up to the Bal Shem Tov from the generation passed down, and connecting the teachings that you get to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe starts out his leadership, first day one. By the way, we're talking tonight from Tom's River / Lakewood, New Jersey. Tonight is exactly 80 years since the Friedricher Rebbe sat and verbringed over here in Lakewood, New Jersey. It was exactly 80 years ago tonight was when the Friedricher Rebbe was here, interestingly enough. That's a whole other interesting conversation. Anyhow, that being said, that during the Rebbe's leadership, after the Rebbe set the road that we are at the time of Moshiach, that this is going to be the generations that are going to lead into, this is going to be the generation that's going to lead into Moshiach. And a huge chunk of what the Rebbe continuously spoke about again and again and again, and he drilled it into the Lubavitchers to drill into the world, is that we are at the time of Moshiach. And more than that, the Rebbe drilled in to even the last Knesset Shluchim, the very last time the Rebbe spoke to the Shluchim before his passing, which is that the Rebbe tells the Shluchim that your whole Kiruv movement is great and wonderful, but more than that, more than what's needed, is your push and your emphasis on Mashiach. So that being said, it was the Rebbe's whole push was that we are going forward towards Mashiach. That being said, and approaching it that way, the question is, we're 25 years post physically seeing a Rebbe, and I'm not necessarily approaching for everyone who's wondering if I'm approaching from a messianic, from the Rebbe messianic. I'm not taking either which side over here in the realm of the Shir. I'm just taking a straightforward approach that from the Rebbe's view, any tzaddik passes that there's Chaim Nitzim for any tzaddik eternal life from the time that the Rebbe's passing. That it's been 25 years in this play out of time, and the Rebbe says something very, very profound and very, very sharp and very, very serious that would make any Lubavitcher start to wonder and start to scratch his head, which is that the Rebbe said this is going to be the last generation of exile, and this is going to be the first generation of Geula. That being the case, it's essentially risking everything that the Rebbe said in a certain sense. It's everything that has been said in a certain sense is being risked on this whole thought process, because if you take this this thought process and you ride with it, so basically how things pan out and how things play out is that if 150 years pass and it's a whole different generation, basically the Rebbe is basically saying you can toss everything he said out the window, which is a crazy, mind-boggling thing that Lubavitcher Rebbe is ready to risk everything to say that I'm telling you with certainty, I'm telling you with absolute seriousness that we are at the end of the road, that this is Moshiach times, and this generation, my generation, which I led, these people, you guys are going to be the ones to see Moshiach. So it's 25 years post that point in time when we last heard the Rebbe speak to us and communicate with us. So for the Lubavitchers, every passing year is held with bated breath, because how do you hold on to that? How do you ride with that? How do you go with that? How do you flow with that? That we're in Mashiach times and the world's not changing. And I think that if you look at the Rebbe's approach on the world and how things were playing out, especially how the Rebbe was approaching the Gulf War, the Rebbe's approach was that things in the world have to start changing. That the world's not just gonna enter into an era of redemption. It's possible. We believe that wholeheartedly. It's a belief of the Rambam that Mashiach can walk in at any second, and that we have the ability from our actions to literally change the world at any given second. But if you're going to follow the process, which the Rebbe seems to be following, which is that through Mashiach's coming is through a period and a process of things happening in the world, and you're going to see changes in the world, and that's really what I want to go into in a second shir, which is what these changes are and how they're affecting the world. But you're going to see where I'm going with this. I'm ending up over here in a second, but you're going to see where I'm going with this over here. All right. First off, before I get to, continue on the Rebbe's approach, I want to just sidetrack that other Gedolim as well hold that we are definitely in a time period of Mashiach. I want to share a personal story. When I was younger, I went with a class trip from the Denver Yeshiva. We went to it was a trip to New York to meet different Gedolim and different Rosh Yeshivas and different people, and we were taken to Reb Elias Fei, one of the Rosh Yeshivas of Philadelphia, big Gadol in the Litvish world. He's no longer alive. That's all. Reb Elias Fei is that's all, and he sat us down in the yeshiva in Philadelphia. It's funny enough that I've always been into video, and I had this recorded back then. And he said out then that he has a direct Masorah from Reb Elchanan Wasserman, who was a Talmud of the Chafetz Chaim. That he got a Masorah that Mashiach has to come. That basically from the time of World War II, there will be 70 years, and Mashiach has to come around the end of these 70 years. So basically, literally in this video, it's funny that Reb Elias Fei, who's literally a Gadol Dor, I have it on video. I was the one who recorded it. He literally said in the video, which I filmed in I think 2000, 2001. He gave an exact date. He gave an exact date. Mashiach had to come by 2009. I actually took this whole calculation and basically said that if you play out the 70 years, obviously Mashiach wasn't here in 2009. If you play out the whole calculation, that Mashiach's coming was basically over a period of time, and since the end of World War II, which would have put it essentially around 1950 plus or 1945 plus 70 years, which interestingly enough brings us to exactly this point in time, 70 years. So I want to talk about the 70 years post World War II, because I think it's something very, very interesting and very, very relevant to a lot of people. You're going to realize something very, very interesting. Again, it's a thought. I'm not a Navi, and I am just literally basing this on some thoughts and basing this off of Ohr Hachaim. But let's take one step forward. So again, we look at 25 years too long. Did the Rebbe's vision hold true? And where are we holding in that time frame? So there's been a big push in Lubavitch because this year is 70 years post Gibel Tammuz, post Rebbe's passing. But this year, this year is 25 years post Gimel Tammuz, but it would be 70 years of the Rebbe's leadership. And this year is 70 years. The Rebbe's biggest push from Basel Lagani was that we are the 7th generation. From the 7th generation, this is the 70th year, which, interestingly enough, I'm going to press the slide forward. Dun, 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 7th generation, 70 years, if you put it together, equals something very interesting, which is 770. 7th generation, 70 years. It is written, there's an interesting Zohar, that Chevla Mashiach will be divided into 2 separate periods, one which is 70 years, and one which is a period of 9 months. In the last 9 months of the Golus, the Zohar writes, after these 70 years is going to come 9 months, and during these 9 months are going to be incredible troubles that are going to face the world. And at the end of this period, there will be a great fear, and from there Mashiach will be revealed. I'm not saying that I know for certainty in any which sense that that this is the breakdown of time, but it's certainly very, very interesting. If you want to follow the chain of time and how things are playing out, that it's definitely that we are in 70 years post the Rebbe taking leadership, and definitely how things are playing out. I want to end off tonight, again, to sum up. The Ohr Hachaim makes it very clear that by the end of the 500 years, starting at 1570 till 2070, would be the time when Mashiach is going to come, guaranteed. So he takes it down from that 6,000 year mark, and he brings it down to 2070 being the last date, according to the Ohr Hachaim on this week's Parsha. Literally, if you open up this week's Parsha, you make the calculation with the Ohr Hachaim is saying, Parsha Tzav, his second parish, Ohr Hachaim makes it very, very clear that that Mashiach is coming by 2070. If you follow the whole Seder that we laid out in the Shir over here, and how the progression of time, you literally end yourself up that you are right now literally at things play out. The world has to start changing. The world has to start changing in a big way. And it's the first time right now we're witnessing something absolutely incredible. For the first time in over 100 years, the world is having the biggest changes that it's ever had. Meaning literally countries are falling, countries don't know what to do. We are witnessing the absolute craziness of times. And where this will go, it's anyone's best guess, and I can only share some thoughts and ideas. But I'd absolutely like to come to the idea and the conclusion that where we are traveling with things is definitely, as the Ohr Hachaim says, wrapping things up. You know, people like to say, "How do you know we're at Mashiach? How do you know things are, that we're really in the times of Mashiach?" And I think that we've presented that from this class, that we are definitely at the very, very end. And this whole Corona situation that's affecting the entire world, I think it's safe to say that the world is not going to just go back to the way it was a month ago. Things are going to start changing in a big way. And how much and how much those changes will play out and how sharp, again, is everyone's best guess. I have a lot more to share, a lot more interesting remarks from a lot of different tzaddikim and different pieces from the Zohar and a lot of different stuff. And Hashem, I will pick that all up tomorrow. But the point is that getting here, if you follow the pattern and if you follow the journey of history, as the Ohr Hachaim plays it out, even in this week's Parsha, that I think it's very, very clear that we are at the end of the line. And if you follow that, then you can be certain that as you watch the news today, you're literally watching the unfolding of Mashiach into the world. So that's what I got to share for tonight. I am going to chime in for comments, whoever is still watching.
Hey, Yosef.
Okay, hello.
Hey, how are you?
How you doing? Who am I speaking with?
It's Roy.
Roy who?
Heisler.
Roy, hey, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Baruch Hashem.
Shimon, he told me that you're doing this video, so I stepped in.
Welcome on in.
So I want to just mention, first of all, thank you for sharing all your insights. It's just the beginning.
Just the beginning, I have a whole second slideshow I want to share tomorrow night. I'm still putting all this together and coming up with these ideas, but and again, it's everyone's best guess. But following, I think today follows a lot of clear sources that we are definitely entering into a time frame of no going back.
Yes, so I wanted to just point just a totally it's related to what's going on, but just a small little gematria thing you may have heard already. If you take the word the gematria of Corona, it's 357.
358.
And if you take the word Mashiach, it's 358.
That's Corona.
So,
Whatever.
what?
They had a whole joke circulating over there that if you another nice English word would also equal 358, but and they were trying to say that you can draw an arrow, whatever you want to draw an arrow around, but I don't think it's for nothing that the gematria does work, and I think that there's definitely something to it. But I have a lot more to share on the exact path going forward tomorrow. But I think once we realize how interesting it is right now, that the world starts shaking exactly as we are in the seventh generation of the Rebbe, and you're in 70 years, 770. That was the Rebbe's push all the years was 770, and I think that the world is starting to shake in the 77th generation, 70 years. That's when we're seeing the world starting to shake in a massive way, and I don't think it's in any which way a coincidence. I think that the Rebbeim knew very well where we would be and where we'd be holding, and we're going to see things progressing. And again, I'm tomorrow. I'm going to present a bunch of other very interesting sources that will push our way forward.
So after this 357,
that you publicize this more widely in advance, like early tomorrow or even tonight, so that you'll have a lot of participants that could benefit from all this.
Right, absolutely. So we'll also have a recording of this so you can pass it around. And Shimmy, anything else to chime in before we tune out?
I just want to mention.
Like I said, Yisrael, yeah.
I just wanted to finish that point. The 357, which goes into 358. We hope that 357 won't be any much longer than another week of Ingolos 357, which would go into the 358 this Pesach.
Yeah.
That would be a wonderful experience, because right now what we're doing is
we had a Zoom a while ago, and it's actually 100 years from when the Rebbe Rashab was nostalgic and from when the Friedrich Rebbe assumed leadership. What does that mean? I'm not sure exactly, but we do know something interesting, that I think it was either the Rebbe Rashab or the Rebbe in Ayin Yom spoke about a period of two periods of 50 years, talking about two different 50-year periods that will lead into Mashiach, and that involves fighting the war of Mashiach, of Milchemes Beis David. Anyway, it's just interesting, something to think about, that this year, and just a few days ago, is exactly 100 years.
Shimmy, every time you turn around, you will start seeing numbers and calculations. And you know what's crazy and what's practical is that we know that it's a very, very famous teaching that it says in the times before Mashiach, even the calculations are going to start making so much sense that even young school children will be able to understand the calculations of the redemption. So I think it's from the Zohar. I have viewers tuning in if anyone wants to quote me where that's from. That in the times before Mashiach, the obviousness of what's happening in the world is so obvious that everyone's going to start realizing it on their own. It's not going to take deep Kabbalists to tell you. The numbers are going to start playing out themselves so easily that everyone's going to be able to look at it and say, "Oh yeah, I get that. I see that." You open up like a Morris and Hendren today, and you read through it, and so many things make sense that maybe even didn't make sense 20 years ago. So
basically what Hashem wants us to do right now, he's simply telling us we need to elevate our homes and bring those what we can do now, because the shuls are locked. We have to elevate our homes into a very, very special place right now, and that's what he's wanting. That's the unity amongst Jews all over the world.
That's on a practical level what we need to do. But my point on this whole shear, everything is a Ikr, but my point is that just the numbers are starting to fall into place. The calculations. Again, this whole shear was based on the Ohr Hachaim, and the Ohr Hachaim on this week's Parsha of all places. The Ohr Hachaim put it in Parsha Tzav, and Ohr Hachaim laid it out very, very clearly in this week's Parsha that like how the calculation is going to work. And if you follow his calculations all the way down, we're there. We're at the end. How things are going to play out again, I'm gonna do a bunch of interesting stuff tomorrow night, with God willing, and we'll play it out from there. So, anyhow, good night, all. I am going to head off to sleep. I will put this share up on Facebook and a link that you can pass it around, and hope all are well. All right.
Okay. Have a good night.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Good night.